Welcome back to Ontario Cold Cases, Canada's true crime podcast. I'm Jay Nickel, Nickel Investigations, and you're listening to another whodunnit Wednesday, a brand new episode of Mick and Mack Mysteries, the series where we step back in time to the smoky streets and shadowy corners post-war Toronto. Grab your coat and your fedora, because today's mystery begins at the edge of everything. Scarborough Bluffs, a breathtaking stretch of cliffside rising above Lake Ontario. Beautiful, majestic, and as of this morning, deadly. Chapter 1. The Edge of Everything. Scarborough Bluffs, just after sunrise. The wind smelled like salt and secrets. The lake churned below them, slate gray and restless as waves slapped at the rocks like impatient hands. Mist hung low along the base of the cliffside, swallowing the shoreline in silence. A constable in a slick poncho stood near the body, arms folded, eyes fixed on the water like he was waiting for it to explain something. Detective McCathie stood just beyond the yellow tape, coat collar turned up against the wind. He squinted in the morning haze, boots sinking slightly into the damp ground as he surveyed the scene. His partner, MacNeely, clomped on behind him, brushing crumbs from his coat and finishing the last bite of a raisin bun. "You know," Mac said, licking his thumb, "there are nicer ways to start a morning." Mick didn't answer. He was already moving down the embankment toward the body, careful, deliberate steps. A man had died there. The world was still catching up to the fact. Dr. Clifford Baines lay awkwardly against a jagged rock, head lolling to one side, his legs twisted like he'd been folded rather than fallen. Blood darkened his temple and soaked the collar of his flannel coat. He wore thick-soled hiking boots and one glove. The other hand was bare, fingers curled. Dr. Kendall, Toronto's reigning coroner and reluctant early riser, stood over the body with a thermos of what he called coffee, but what others considered evidence of war crimes. "Gravity's a cruel mistress," Kendall said flatly, glancing up the bluff's edge some 40 feet above. "But this one didn't fall by accident." Mac raised an eyebrow. "You saying someone pushed him?" "I'm saying he didn't slip. There's bruising on the forearms, defensive. The jacket's torn, probably grabbed. And no notebook." Kendall tapped the man's chest with the back of his glove. "Professor never went anywhere without that thing. Carried it like a Bible. So either it's down there in the surf," he motioned to the foaming lake, "or someone didn't want it found." Mick crouched beside the body, taking it all in. The way the man's boot had come loose, the mud smudges along his hip, the angle of the fall. It was wrong. All of it. Wrong in the way a fake signature was wrong. Familiar enough to fool the eye, but not the instinct. "Something's off," Mick said. "Gee," Mac muttered. "Could it be the corpse at the bottom of a cliff?" Mick ignored him. His gaze had drifted upward, following the jagged cliff face to a stunted pine that clung to the edge. Something white fluttered there, caught in a branch. He stood in motion to Mac. "Give me a boost." Mac grunted but obeyed. Mick scrambled partway up the incline and snagged the scrap of paper just as the wind tried to tug it loose. It was damp, smudged, but still legible. Handwriting. Coordinates. Maybe a soil depth or a geographical marker. He frowned. "Well," Mac asked, "treasure map or somebody's grocery list?" Mick held the note to the light, rotating it slowly. Whatever it is, it meant something. Someone didn't want it left behind. "So we're thinking murder now?" Mac asked, already fishing in his coat pocket for a second bun. Mick turned to look out over the lake. The sun was rising now, bleeding orange through the clouds, casting long shadows down the face of the bluffs. The wind carried with it the scent of earth, rain, and something ancient, like the land was holding its breath. "No," Mick said softly, "we're thinking motive." Mac sighed. "Figures. Every time I think we're going to get a quiet one, some guy goes and gets himself pushed off a landmark." "You said it yourself," Mick replied, tucking the paper into his notebook. "There are nicer ways to start a morning." "Yeah," Mac muttered, shaking his head. "A full pot of coffee and no dead geologists." Chapter 2. Land Deals and Loose Gravel. Didn't take long for the trail to lead from the windswept bluffs to polished floors and poured concrete. Marla Fitch's office was perched in a freshly minted building at the edge of Scarborough's commercial sprawl. Glass facade, chrome railings, just enough marble to convince you someone had money. A brushed brass plaque on the door read Fitch Development Group in capital letters that didn't leave room for compromise. Inside, the decor was minimalist and merciless. Leather chairs, clean lines, no clutter. A single black and white photograph of the Scarborough Bluffs, pre-construction, hung in the wall behind her desk, like a trophy. Marla Fitch didn't rise when Mick and Mack entered. She sat with one leg crossed over the other, flipping through a stack of blueprints with the easy confidence of a woman who knew the price of everything and the value of winning. "Detective," she said without looking up, "if this is about the permit dispute, I'll save you the trouble. The zoning's airtight." Mick stepped forward. "It's about Dr. Clifford Baines." That got her attention. She looked up, sharp cheekbones, sharper eyes, gave a smile that didn't quite reach them. "Ah, the professor. Heard he had an accident." "You knew him?" Mick asked. "Knew of him. He showed up at a few council meetings, waved around maps, railed against erosion, claimed my project was destabilizing the cliffs." She shrugged. "Everyone's got a cause." Mack wandered over to a model of the proposed development. Rows of tidy townhomes lined up like good little soldiers, all marching dangerously close to the bluff's edge. "Funny thing," he said, peering down the miniature trees. "The project was supposed to break ground next month." "Still is," replied Marla crisply. "And Dr. Baines was scheduled to speak against it at last night's town meeting," Mick added. "Only he never showed." Marla offered a small, pointed smile. Maybe the ground beat him to it. "He filed a new report," Mick said. "Do you know what was in it?" "No idea. I don't read bedtime stories about shale." She stood and walked around her desk, arms folded. "Look, I know how this looks. But Baines was just another crank with a clipboard. No offense, but men like that spend more time yelling at clouds than changing anything." Mick glanced around the room. "You must have been doing something, right? You've got the photograph." "Nostalgia," Marla said coolly. "Even developers like to remember what we're tearing down." Back at the precinct, Mack was up to his elbows in folders. A dusty box of Dr. Baines' field notes had been delivered by a research assistant from the university. He mumbled something about tenure reviews and left without making eye contact. The notes were detailed, dense, and unforgiving. Hand-drawn, stratigraphic columns, mineral compositions, erosion forecasts. Kind of bedtime reading that could put a caffeinated jackrabbit to sleep. Mack groaned, flipping another page. "Think a man smart enough to decode 400 million years of rock could have figured out how to type." "Keep looking," Mick said, pacing nearby with a cup of tea. "Wouldn't have carried that notebook everywhere if it didn't mean something." Mack grunted and kept digging. Passed over soil pH logs, survey sketches, more columns, and then paused. Tucked between two sheets was a small folded memo scrawled in pencil. Baines' handwriting. "Old structure. Layer beneath the clay. Metal reading spiked, not natural. Found something. Could change everything." Mack sat up straighter. "Hey, Mick, you might want to see this." Mick took the note, reading it twice. "Found something old. Could change everything." "Sounds like more than just another protest speech," Mack said. "Sounds like a motive." Chapter 3. Birdsong and Bluster. Scarborough Bluffs might have looked serene from a distance. Waves whispering against stone, gulls gliding across the sky. But up close, the wind bit through your coat, and every creaking branch sounded like it was keeping secrets. Mick and Mack trudged through a narrow conservation trail, boots crunching against half-frozen leaves. Signs warned visitors to stay in the marked path. Mack naturally veered off immediately to avoid goose droppings. They found Elias Morgan crouched beside a sapling, gently pressing the soil back into place like it was a wounded animal. He wore a canvas jacket crusted with dried mud, wiry gray hair that curled over his collar, and hands like tree bark. He glanced up without smiling. "You're standing in a reforestation zone." "You're Elias Morgan?" Mick asked. "Depends who's asking, and if they brought coffee." Mick handed over a thermos. The man sniffed it, nodded grudgingly, and took a sip. "Still better than Kendall's," he muttered. Mack, meanwhile, wandered a few yards off toward the clearing where a woman in a feathered cap was peering through binoculars. She stood completely still, except for the occasional precise flick of a pencil across a notepad. "Excuse me, ma'am," Mack began. "Detective MacNeely, Toronto Police. Mind if I—" "Step back," she snapped, without looking at him. "You're casting a shadow on my merganser." "You're what now?" "Red-breasted merganser. Mergus serrator. Male, molting, probably annoyed." "He's not the only one," Mack muttered. "I just have a couple of questions." She turned toward him slowly, adjusting her glasses like she was zeroing in on a particularly invasive weed. "Did you trample the sedge grass to get here?" I may have bent a few blades." "Congratulations," she said icily. "You just reversed 2 months of ecosystem rehabilitation." "Okay, let's all take a deep breath. Not near the nesting site." Back by the sapling, Elias Morgan chuckled, watching the exchange with visible amusement. "Dorothea Wimpole. She's been birdwatching here since before color television. And she once chased a city engineer out of this park with a walking stick. Good luck." Mick turned back toward Elias. "We're looking into the death of Dr. Clifford Baines." Elias grunted. "Didn't expect to outlive him. Thought he'd calcify before 60. "You two weren't on good terms?" "Well, we both hated the developers. Just hated different parts of them. I hated their greed, he hated their geology. Cliff was smart, but stubborn. Thought if he mapped every rock, the city would come to its senses." "You ever mentioned finding something unusual?" Elias scratched his beard. "He said something about signals a few weeks back. Showed me some readings. Said he was getting strange anomalies just east of the lookout point. Don't stop digging around where the slope's unstable." "Did he?" Mick asked. "You don't tell Baines anything. He didn't listen to me or the city or gravity." Across the clearing, Mack had someone being cornered beside a pond while Mrs. Wimpole gave a stern lecture on the importance of migratory nesting corridors. Mick decided to intervene. "Excuse me, Mrs. Wimpole, might I ask if you've seen anyone unusual around here recently?" She adjusted her binoculars. "Define unusual." "The raccoons have started nesting in pairs. Someone's been feeding the crows cheese slices again." "Anyone human?" "Ah," she thought for a moment. "There was a man, big fellow, heavy boots. Had a shovel over his shoulder. Looked like a miner, but with less charm. Kept looking over his shoulder like he'd stolen something." "When was this?" "Last week, late afternoon, near the old maple stand. That's the part of the bluff that's been fenced off since the mudslide in '44, she sniffed. "Of course, the fence is purely decorative." "Did Dr. Baines ever go there?" "All the time. Called it the hidden fault line." She leaned in. "He said the land was trying to tell us a story. We were too busy paving over the words." Mick nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mrs. Wimpole." She raised a finger. "Tell your friend not to come back unless he brings suet cakes. The good kind." Max scowled as they walked back to the car. "She threatened me with a field guide." "She threatened you with ornithological accuracy," Mick replied, "which, frankly, is worse." "So what do we get? Eccentric geologist, shifty digger, and a lady who thinks I'm more destructive than a badger." Mick looked out over the lake. "We also got a location." "Maple stand?" Mac asked. Mick nodded. "Looks like it's time we went off the beaten path." Chapter 4. Maps, Marks, and Motives. Back at division, the wind gave way to warmth. The scent of old coffee and floor polish replaced lake air and loam. The torn scrap of paper Mick had recovered from the tree is now pinned under a glass weight in the corner of his desk. Numbers, faint, water blurred, still there. 43.72 -79.24 E-17 Grid Ref B-3. Mick stared at them, lips pursed, tapping a pencil against his knuckle. Coordinates, Mac asked, peering over his shoulder and squinting like that might bring enlightenment. More than that, Mick said. This isn't just latitude and longitude, it's an old grid reference. Military? Could be. Could also be surveyor's marks from when the bluffs were mapped back in the 30s. Baines was the kind of man who read geological surveys like bedtime stories. Mac dropped into the opposite chair. Think you found something? Mick didn't answer. He was already flipping through an old municipal overlay map, fingers tracing the faded lines. A red grease pencil once marked out development zones, erosion points, and something curious near the fenced-off maple stand. B-3. He tapped it. Right here. That's where he was heading. Find what? That, Mick said, might be a question for Teddy Withers. Teddy Withers lived in a brick bungalow in Birch Cliff, where every shelf grown with books, every wall was hung with maps, and every end table supported some kind of brass nautical instrument that hadn't been used since Queen Victoria's coronation. He answered the door in a housecoat and steel-toed boots, the headlamp strapped across his forehead and a metal detector leaned against the coat rack like a trusted cane. Detectives, welcome to the Cave of Curiosities. Mind the fox traps. Fox traps? Mac asked, hesitating in the doorway. They're metaphorical, Teddy assured him, then paused. Mostly. Inside, it was hard to tell whether Teddy was a scholar, a hoarder, or a very lonely man with too much time and access to glue. Charts of the Scarborough Bluffs lined one wall, annotated in looping cursive. Beside them hung copies of 19th century newspaper articles about missing treasure, buried payrolls, and war-era smuggling routes. What can I do for Toronto's finest? Teddy asked, settling into a creaky leather chair and motioning to a teetering stack of books. Don't move those. They're in chronological order by hunch. Mick got straight to the point. Clifford Baines came to see you recently. Ah, Cliff, Teddy smiled wistfully. Man had rocks in his head, the literal kind. But he knew his way around a dig site. Said he found something interesting. Brought me a map fragment. What kind of map? Hand-drawn, old, tattered at the edges. Looked like part of a military land use sketch. There was a symbol next, near the base of the bluff, right over what used to be the Loyalist supply route. Loyalist gold? Mac asked, barely masking the skepticism. Teddy beamed. Buried payroll. Legend goes, retreating troops in 1830 hid it near the bluffs during the American advance on New York. Some say it's just folklore, but Cliff, he thought he found the key. Did he show you where? Wouldn't say, but he left muttering something about an anomaly in the sediment layers. Said if he could match the fault line to the map fragment, it would prove the site. And then Mick asked. Then he stopped calling. I figured he either found it or he got smart and took a sabbatical somewhere warm. Mick exchanged a look with Mac. Neither, he said quietly. He's dead. Teddy's grin faded. Murder? We're looking into it. Teddy leaned forward, the headlamp still strapped to his forehead, casting eerie shadows across the wall maps. If someone thought Cliff had found the treasure, they might have decided not to share. Back in the car, Mac let out a long sigh. Great. Now we got conspiracy, colonial gold, and a corpse. What next? Ghosts? No ghosts, Mick said, eyes fixed on the fading afternoon light. Someone believed in the treasure. Enough to kill for it. Mac leaned back and muttered, I'd settle for believing in a quiet evening for once. Chapter 5. The Treasure in the Trap. The sky was still half asleep when Mick cut the engine. A thin blue haze clung to the ground like a whispered warning, and the bluff loomed ahead, quiet, empty, almost reverent. Somewhere above, a gull cried out and then thought better of it. Mick and Mack moved on foot the rest of the way, boots muffled by wet grass, breath fogging in the cold. They followed a deer path that wound around the fenced-off section near the old maple stand, same place Mrs. Wimpold mentioned. The trees creaked softly in the breeze, like they were stretching old bones. Mick crouched behind a thicket and checked his watch. It should come at first light. Not dark enough for flashlights, not light enough to be spotted from the road. Mack nodded, stifling a yawn. Think it's her? She's the only one with enough nerve to dig into city-owned land before a public meeting. They didn't have to wait long. At 6:07 a.m., a figure emerged through the trees. Moving fast, eyes scanned the area like a raccoon that wore pearls. Marla Fitch. She was dressed in a belted coat and rubber boots, shovel in hand, her breath puffing in short clouds as she made her way to a depression in the earth marked with a pink survey flag. She glanced around once, then began to dig. Well, Mac whispered, either she's guilty or she's the world's most hands-on CEO. They gave her 5 minutes. That was long enough for her to sweat, to curse under her breath, and unearth something shallow but deliberate. A rusted tin box, rectangular and sealed with wax paper. She was brushing dirt off the lid when Mick stepped out of the brush. You missed a spot, he said. Marla spun, shovel raised. Her eyes darted between them, calculating. You're trespassing, she said. This is protected land. Funny, Mac said, stepping beside Mick. That's exactly what we were going to say to you. Marla lowered the shovel slowly. I was checking soil density. It's part of a foundation study. At 6 in the morning, Mick said. Early workday. In a restricted conservation zone. Preliminary survey. With no clipboard or permit, Mick held out a hand. Let's see what's in the box. She hesitated. You don't have a warrant? That's all right, Mac said. We'll just hold on to it until we get one. Reluctantly, Marla stepped back. Mick knelt and opened the tin. Inside, wrapped in wax paper and bound with a cracked rubber band, were a dozen pages. Soil reports, sketch maps, handwritten field notes, and Baines's initials on every corner. His notebook, Mick said, or part of it. The top page was dated 2 days before Baines's death. It read, Substratum mineral shaft of B3 confirmed. Unstable foundation. High-risk erosion zone. No construction recommended. Site overlap with historical coordinates suggests deeper significance. Mac whistled low. He wasn't just trying to stop her project. He had the proof, geological and historical. And she knew it, Mick said, standing slowly. That's why she came back. Marla crossed her arms, her voice tight. You think I killed him? I think he had a lot riding him staying quiet. He wasn't the type to be bought. I didn't touch him, she said, but he was going to ruin everything. Years of work, permits, investors. People don't fall off cliffs for market reasons, Marla. She opened her mouth to argue, then shut it. Her hands were trembling now, not from cold. Mick pocketed the papers. You want a lawyer. Max slung an arm over her shoulder like a disappointed uncle at a Sunday picnic. Maybe a fresh shovel. This one's going to be tied up as evidence. Chapter 6. Over the Edge. The church basement being hastily dressed up as a community hall. Plastic chairs in crooked rows, a pot of weak coffee in the corner, and a microphone that squealed whenever someone looked at it sideways. The room buzzed with tension. Neighbors, counselors, protesters, developers, all packed in, murmuring about the man who didn't show up last time. The ones who were here now, looking very official in trench coats. Mick stood at the back of the room, flipping through Dr. Baines's recovered pages while Mac adjusted the microphone near the stage. The room hadn't noticed Marla yet. She was coming. She always showed up to meetings she thought she could control. At 6:57 p.m. she entered. Crisp blazer, hard smile, and a clipboard clutched like a shield. She marched up front and took the mic before anyone could stop her. "Good evening," she began smoothly. "Thank you all for attending tonight's discussion on the future of our shoreline community. I know there's been some, unfortunate disruption since our last meeting. But let me assure you that Fitch Development remains committed to building responsibly, ethically, and in full compliance with municipal." "How about murder?" Mac asked, loud enough to stop the rustling of notes and mutterings in their tracks. The crowd turned. Mick stepped forward with a small box in hand, the calm patience of someone who already knew how this would end. "You'll have something in the soil, Marla." Her jaw tensed. "I don't know what you're talking about." Mac held up the rusted tin. "Baines' notes. The ones proving the ground under your project would have failed any inspection. The ones he planned to read here the night he died." A ripple moved through the crowd. "This is slander," Marla said, trying to smile. I never saw those pages. I barely knew the man." Mick raised an eyebrow. "You met him a week before he died. We have phone records. And he offered to delay his findings for a price. Lies!" "Funny thing about lies," Mac said, casually reaching behind the podium. "Sound worse when everyone hears them." He flipped the switch on the microphone. The speaker crackled to life right as Marla hissed. "He was going to ruin everything. I gave him a chance. He said no. So I made sure he'd never..." She froze. The crowd didn't. Gasps, shouts. Someone dropped the coffee cup. The counselor reached for his phone. "Marla Fitch," Mick said quietly, stepping forward. "You're under arrest for the murder of Dr. Clifford Baines." She didn't resist. Not really. Her clipboard hit the floor, and for a moment she looked not like a developer, like someone who had spent too much time building on shaky ground. Epilogue. Bluff called. A few days later, the Bluffs were quiet again. Mick and Mack stood near the old maple stand, wind ruffling their coats, the lake stretching out below them in the gray gold of afternoon. "Still no sign of gold," Mack muttered, kicking at a root. "Just rocks and frostbite." "There was treasure," Mick said, eyes scanned the landscape, "just not the kind you could spend." Mack raised an eyebrow. "Truth, integrity, a man who stood up for something even when no one wanted to hear it?" "Ah," Mack said, "sentimental treasure." Mick allowed himself a faint smile. "Greed doesn't need gold to get people killed." "Well," Mack said, stretching with a grunt, "next time someone wants to go cliff diving for ethics, they can leave us out of it. My legs are still sore, my coat smells like duck droppings, and no one's giving me any credit for solving the case." "I mean the case that was cracked open by a birdwatcher with a sharper mind than both of us combined?" Mac grumbled. "Don't remind me." They turned to leave, heading back toward the trail. As they reached the tree line, a familiar voice rang out behind them. "Detectives, wait!" Mrs. Dorothea Wimple emerged from the brush, her binoculars around her neck and a canvas bag over one shoulder. "Thought you might like to see the dedication," she said, handing Mac a leaflet. "We're naming the conservation path after Dr. Baines, and the Historical Society is publishing his final notes." Mick nodded respectfully. He'd have liked that. "Also," she added brightly, "I'm writing a book." "Bird watching?" Mick asked. "Not quite. It's fiction, cozy mystery. Features a pair of detectives, one's quiet, thoughtful, fond of tea. The other's loud, impulsive, prone to mishaps." She winked at Mac, based loosely. Mac stared at her. "You didn't happen to give them a sidekick that gets chased by ducks, did you?" "No ducks," she promised. "Maybe a goose." She turned and disappeared down the trail. Mac sighed. "Save the city, stop a killer, and somehow end up as comic relief in a paperback." Mick clapped him on the back. "Could be worse." "Yeah," Mac muttered. "How?" Mick tilted his head toward the lake. "Could be real geese." Thank you for listening. This has been J. Nickel of Nickel Investigations, and this has been a Mick and Mack mystery on Ontario Cold Cases, Canada's True Crime Podcast. The end.